The envelope sat on my porch like a coiled snake. White. Official. With a red stamp that read Pine Ridge Homeowners Association across the top. I'd been in my new cabin exactly 3 weeks, finally enjoying the peace I'd moved to the mountains for, when this thing arrived. Inside was a $500 fine for hunting on my own land. Attached was a photo of me walking into the woods behind my cabin with my rifle. Timestamp and all. Someone had been watching me. The letter was signed by Wanda, HOA president. The problem, I wasn't part of their HOA. I'd checked the deed twice before buying. My 15 acres sat outside their boundaries. But apparently, that didn't matter to them. If you're reading this from your own quiet corner of the world, drop a comment and let me know where you're from. You're going to want to hear how this played out. They tried to fine me for doing something completely legal on my own property. So I found out who really owned the only road into their neighborhood. I spent the next 3 days reading everything I could find about HOA law in North Carolina. Turns out, homeowners associations only have power over properties that actually signed their covenants. I hadn't signed anything. My land predated their development by decades. Legally, they had no authority over me. None. I drafted a polite email to the HOA board explaining this and asking them to withdraw the fine. I hit send and waited. No response. A week passed. Then I got another letter. This one wasn't polite. It threatened legal action if I didn't pay within 7 days. They were doubling down. I decided it was time to see exactly who I was dealing with. Pine Ridge held monthly HOA meetings on Saturday evenings, according to their bylaws. They were open to community members. The bylaws defined that as anyone living within a 1-mile radius of the development. Technically, that included me. I drove down the narrow road that cut through my property, past the cheerful Pine Ridge community gate, and into the subdivision itself. The neighborhood looked like it had been stamped out of a catalog. 45 identical craftsman homes, matching mailboxes, spotless driveways, not a leaf out of place. The clubhouse sat at the center, white-painted wood with neat flower beds leading to the entrance. Inside, folding chairs faced a long table at the front. About 20 residents sat quietly, waiting. I took a seat in the back row. At exactly 6 p.m., the door opened and she walked in. Wanda, tall, late 30s, short blonde hair, cut sharp and professional. A gray suit that cost more than my truck, heels clicking against the floor like a judge's gavel. She carried a leather portfolio and moved like someone who expected obstacles to remove themselves from her path. When she reached the head table, she didn't sit. She stood, scanning the room with pale blue eyes that cataloged every face. When her gaze passed over me, it paused, just for a moment, then moved on. She opened the meeting like a CEO running a board session. Budget approval for landscaping. HOA fees are increasing from $150 to $200 monthly. New paint color restrictions. New mailbox regulations. She didn't ask for a discussion. She stated facts, paused for 3 seconds, and moved forward. When someone raised a hand, she acknowledged them with a smile that didn't reach her eyes and said the board had already voted. End of discussion. The residents kept their heads down. One woman near the front, Asian, mid-40s, looked like she wanted to speak but kept stopping herself. No one challenged Wanda. No one pushed back. This wasn't a meeting. It was a lecture. Most residents had signed up for automatic fee payments years ago and never questioned the financial reports. Wanda made sure those reports stayed buried on a password-protected website that few people even knew existed. Then she got to the final agenda item, community safety concerns. She didn't look at me, but I felt the room shift. Her voice took on concerned authority. There had been reports of dangerous activity near the community. An individual who was not a resident had been hunting with firearms close to homes where children lived. The board had issued a citation, but the individual was refusing to comply. She wanted everyone to know the board would pursue all available legal remedies to protect the community. My jaw tightened. She was talking about me, twisting the facts so anyone listening would think I was firing bullets past their windows. I stood up, every head turned. Wanda's eyes locked onto mine. Something cold flickered across her face. Then the mask slid back. "You have something to say?" Pleasant voice. Steel underneath. "I do. I'm Ryan Maddox. I own the property north of this development, and I think there's been a misunderstanding about jurisdiction and property rights." She smiled. It didn't reach her eyes. "This is a closed meeting for HOA members. If you have concerns, submit them in writing. I'd prefer to address them now, since you just addressed them publicly." Silence. Her smile froze. "Then perhaps we should discuss this privately. After the meeting. I think the community deserves to hear the facts. Don't you?" Her fingers tightened on the table edge, barely noticeable. But I saw it. Meeting adjourned. She gathered her portfolio and walked out the side door without looking back. The residents filed out in uncomfortable silence, avoiding eye contact as they passed me. But one person stayed. The Asian woman from the front row approached, her expression cautious. "You're the one who bought the Callaway land." "That's right." She glanced toward the door where Wanda had disappeared. "Be careful. She doesn't like people who push back, and she has ways of making life very difficult." She hesitated. "I'm Sarah Chen. I'm on the HOA board, treasurer. If you need to know how things work around here, feel free to ask." "I appreciate that." She left quickly, like she didn't want to be seen talking to me. I stood alone in the empty clubhouse, fluorescent lights humming overhead. Outside, car engines started, residents heading home to their identical houses. I thought about Wanda's face when I'd stood up, the way her smile had frozen, the way she'd shut everything down the second I challenged her. This wasn't going to be resolved with polite emails. Wanda Reese didn't care about the law. She cared about control, and I'd just made it clear I wasn't going to be controlled. I walked to my truck and sat in the driver's seat, staring at the neat rows of houses. Then I pulled out my phone. County clerk's office, property records, easement law. If Wanda wanted a fight, she'd get one. But it would be fought with facts, documents, and the law on my side. I started the engine and drove back up Old Callaway Trail Road, the road that cuts through my property. The road I was starting to think about very differently now. Monday morning, I drove to the county clerk's office. It was a 40-minute drive into town, past farms and forest, until the landscape opened up into strip malls and traffic lights. The clerk's office sat in an old brick building next to the courthouse, the kind of place that still used filing cabinets and had that distinct smell of old paper and floor wax. I walked up to the counter and asked for property records related to Old Callaway Trail Road and the Pine Ridge subdivision. The clerk, a woman in her 60s with reading glasses on a chain, gave me a form to fill out. 20 minutes later, she came back with a cardboard box full of documents, deeds, survey maps, easement agreements, and building permits. I spread everything out on a table in the corner and started reading. This was what I did for a living. Find patterns in data, trace problems back to their source, debug systems until they make sense. This was just another system, and something about it wasn't adding up. The first document I found was the original Callaway family deed from 1962. William Callaway had owned 200 acres of farmland. In 2016, a developer approached the family about selling. By then, Old Man Callaway was in his 80s and had no children. He sold 185 acres to the developer, but kept 15 acres, including the farmhouse and the forest behind it. The developer built Pine Ridge, 45 homes on winding streets with a clubhouse and a community pool. And they used the old farm road, now called Old Callaway Trail Road, as the main access route from the county highway to the development. I pulled out the survey map and traced the road with my finger. It started at the highway, cut through what was now my property, and ended at the Pine Ridge Gate. The entire road, all 0.8 miles of it, sat on land I now owned. I felt my pulse quicken. The developer must have made some kind of agreement with Callaway. I started digging through the easement documents. There it was. A temporary construction easement dated 2016, granting the developer access to use Old Callaway Trail Road during the building phase of Pine Ridge. Duration: 2 years. It expired in 2018. I read it 3 times to make sure I wasn't missing something. Temporary. 2 years. Expired. I flipped through the rest of the documents, looking for a permanent easement, something that would give the HOA ongoing legal rights to use the road. Nothing. Just the expired construction agreement. I sat back in my chair, my mind racing. When Callaway died last year and his land went to auction, that road should have been addressed. Someone should have made sure the HOA had legal access documented and recorded. But they hadn't, which meant Pine Ridge had been using my road for the past 6 years without any legal right to do so. 45 families drove across my property every single day, and they had no easement, no recorded agreement, nothing. I pulled up North Carolina property law on my phone and started reading. Easements had to be in writing and properly recorded to be enforceable. There was something called a prescriptive easement, where you could claim rights through long-term use, but that required at least 20 years of continuous, open use. Pine Ridge had only existed for 8 years. Not even close. I took photos of every document with my phone. The expired easement. The survey map showing the road on my land. The deed proves I owned it. Then I asked the clerk for certified copies of everything. She charged me $40 and said they'd be ready in 3 days. I walked out of that building feeling like I'd just found a trap door in the system. Wanda had threatened me with legal action. She'd stood in front of her community and painted me as a dangerous threat. She'd used her authority as an attorney and HOA president to intimidate me into paying a fine I didn't owe. And the whole time, her entire neighborhood had been trespassing on my property, every single day, without permission, without legal right. The irony was almost funny. Almost. I sat in my truck in the parking lot and called the number on the business card Sarah Chen had slipped me after the meeting. She answered on the second ring. I told her what I'd found. There was a long silence on the other end. Then she said something that made my blood run cold. Wanda knows. She has to know. She's a real estate attorney. She would have reviewed all these documents when she bought her house. Another pause. She's been banking on nobody else figuring it out. I thanked her and hung up. My hands were shaking. Not from fear, from anger. Wanda had known all along that the HOA was on shaky legal ground. And instead of addressing it, instead of negotiating an easement agreement with me like a reasonable person, she'd tried to bully me into submission. She'd tried to make me the problem, to paint me as the bad guy, so no one would look too closely at the real issue. Well, I was looking now, and I was about to make sure everyone else looked too. I needed a lawyer. Not just any lawyer. Someone who specialized in property law and knew how to handle a fight like this. I spent 2 days researching attorneys in the area, reading reviews, and checking case histories. I finally found Marcus Webb, 50 years old, 25 years of experience in real estate disputes, and a reputation for being thorough and aggressive when needed. His office was in a small town 30 minutes away. I called and made an appointment for Thursday afternoon. His office was in an old Victorian house converted into a law practice. Dark wood floors, bookshelves lined with legal volumes, a desk covered in neat stacks of files. Marcus was tall and lean, with graying hair and sharp eyes that assessed me the moment I walked in. I sat down and laid out everything. The fine, the threats, the meeting with Wanda, the documents from the county clerk. He listened without interrupting, occasionally making notes on a yellow legal pad. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair and smiled. Not a friendly smile, a hunter's smile. "You've done good work here." He tapped the certified copies I'd brought. "This is an open and shut case. No recorded easement. They've been trespassing for 8 years. He paused. "The question is, what do you want to do about it?" "I want them to leave me alone. I want them to admit they were wrong and withdraw the fine." And I want to make sure they can't pull this again. Marcus nodded slowly. We can do that. But you have leverage here. Significant leverage. That road is their only access. Without it, those 45 homes are landlocked. You could negotiate an easement agreement that compensates you fairly for the use of your property. We're talking thousands of dollars annually. I thought about that. Part of me wanted to just walk away. Let them use the road. Forget the whole thing. But then I remembered Wanda's face at that meeting. The way she'd twisted the truth. The way she'd tried to paint me as dangerous. What if they refuse to negotiate? Then you have the legal right to restrict access. You could put up a gate, a fence. You could legally block that road tomorrow if you wanted to. He leaned forward. But I'd recommend we try the civilized approach first. Send them a formal letter. Lay out the facts. Give them 30 days to respond. If they're reasonable, we'll negotiate an easement, and everyone walks away happy. If they're not, we escalate. And if we escalate, then we make it very clear that you own that road, and you're willing to exercise your property rights. Fully. He pulled out a fresh legal pad and started writing. I'll draft a cease and desist letter. It'll outline your property ownership, the lack of a valid easement, and your demand that they withdraw the fine and enter good faith negotiations. We'll send it certified mail so there's proof of delivery. I watched him write, his pen moving quickly across the page. How much is this going to cost me? I charge $200 an hour. This letter will take me about 2 hours to draft and finalize. After that, it depends on how they respond. If they negotiate, maybe another few hours to draft an easement agreement. If they fight, it could get expensive. But honestly, I don't think they'll fight. Not once they see the documentation. Wanda Reese might be arrogant, but she's not stupid. She knows she doesn't have a legal leg to stand on. 3 days later, the letter was ready. It was 6 pages of precise legal language that boiled down to a simple message. I own the road. You have no right to use it. Withdraw the fine and negotiate, or face the consequences. Marcus sent it via certified mail to the HOA board and personally to Wanda Reese at her law firm. Then we waited. I spent that week trying to focus on work. But it was hard. I kept checking my email, my mailbox, my phone, wondering if they'd respond, wondering what Wanda would do. Part of me expected her to call, maybe try to smooth things over. Part of me expected her to come out swinging. What I didn't expect was silence. 7 days passed. Nothing. Not an email, not a phone call, not even an acknowledgement that they'd received the letter. On day 8, I got an email. Not from Wanda, from her law firm. The subject line read, "Response to baseless threats." I opened it and felt my jaw tighten. The email was short and dismissive. It claimed the HOA had prescriptive easement rights through historical use. It accused me of attempting extortion. It threatened to file a lawsuit if I interfered with community access. And it was signed by Wanda Reese, attorney at law, not HOA president, attorney at law. I forwarded it to Marcus. He called me 10 minutes later. She's bluffing. Prescriptive easement requires 20 years of use. They've only been there 8. She knows this. She's trying to intimidate you. He paused. The question is, do you want to keep playing nice, or do you want to call her bluff? I thought about that email. The word extortion, the dismissive tone, the complete refusal to even acknowledge the facts. What does calling her bluff look like? It looks like a gate and a lock on your property, across your road. I didn't answer right away. This felt like crossing a line, but then again, they'd crossed a line first. They'd fined me, threatened me, publicly slandered me, refused to negotiate. Maybe it was time they understood I wasn't bluffing either. Let's do it. Marcus was quiet for a moment. You're sure once we do this, there's no going back. This will get ugly. I'm sure. All right then. Let me make some calls. And Ryan document everything. Photos, videos, timestamps. We're going to need it. Marcus helped me find a contractor who could work fast. By Wednesday morning, a crew showed up at the property line where my land met the Pine Ridge entrance. They brought chain link fencing, steel posts, concrete, and a heavy-duty gate with a commercial-grade lock. I'd given them specific instructions. The fence had to be clearly on my property, set back 10 feet from the HOA boundary to avoid any disputes, and it had to be solid, no cutting through it with bolt cutters. I stood there and watched them work, digging post holes, mixing concrete, welding the gate frame. It took 6 hours. By 3 p.m., there was an 8-foot-tall fence stretching across Old Callaway Trail Road with a locked gate in the middle. I'd put up signs on both sides. Private property, no trespassing, access by permission only. And I'd included my phone number in case of emergencies. Fire trucks, ambulances, police. They could call me and I'd open it immediately, but everyone else they'd need to talk to me first. The first car arrived at 5:20 p.m. A black SUV is coming down the road from the highway. It slowed as it approached the gate, then stopped. I could see the driver's face through the windshield. Confusion, then anger. The door opened and a man in a business suit got out. He walked up to the gate, grabbed it, and shook it, locked. He pulled out his phone and started making calls. Within 15 minutes, there were 6 cars lined up behind him. People are getting out, talking to each other, pointing at the fence, pulling out their phones. I sat in my truck about 100 yards away, watching. By 6 p.m., there were at least 20 cars backed up on the road. Some people had turned around and left. Others were standing in groups, arguing about what to do. A few walked up to the signs and took pictures. Then I saw the sheriff's car pull up. Deputy Jackson. I'd called him earlier to give him a heads up about what I was doing. He'd said as long as I wasn't blocking emergency access and the fence was on my property. It was my legal right. Now he was here to make sure things didn't get out of hand. I got out of my truck and walked toward the gate. Jackson saw me coming and nodded. He was talking to the man in the business suit, the first one who'd arrived, when I got close enough to hear. The man was saying something about this being illegal, about blocking public access, about calling a lawyer. Jackson held up a hand. "Sir, I've reviewed the property records. This is private land. The owner has every right to control access." He turned to me. "Mr. Maddox, these folks need to get home. You willing to let them through?" I looked at the crowd. Tired faces, frustrated faces. A few looked genuinely worried. These weren't the enemy. They were just people trying to get home after work. "I'll open the gate, for today, but I need to speak with the HOA board, tonight." Jackson nodded and turned to the crowd. "He's going to let you through, but you need to work this out with your HOA. This is between property owners." I unlocked the gate and swung it open. The cars started moving through slowly, drivers staring at me as they passed. A few looked angry. Most just looked confused. One woman rolled down her window. "What's going on? Why are you doing this? Ask your HOA president. She has the answers." The last car went through, and I closed the gate again. Locked it. Jackson walked over. "You know this is going to get messy. It already is messy. I'm just making it visible." He nodded slowly. "Fair enough. Just keep me in the loop. And make sure that the gate opens for emergency vehicles. Always." He drove off and I stood there alone on the road as the sun started to set. My phone was already buzzing. Text messages, voicemails, emails, all from numbers I didn't recognize. Some polite, some angry, some threatening. I ignored them all except one. Sarah Chen. Her message was short. "Emergency HOA meeting tonight at 8 p.m. Wanda is furious. Be careful." I grabbed my folder of documents and headed back down at 7:45. The clubhouse parking lot was packed. I walked in, and the room went silent. Every eye turned to look at me. I found a seat near the back and waited. At exactly 8 p.m., Wanda walked in, and if looks could kill, I would have been dead before she reached the front table. She didn't sit down. She stood at the head of the table, hands gripping the edge, and stared directly at me. You have a lot of nerve showing up here after what you pulled today. I stood up. I have every right to be here. This is a community meeting, and this community needs to hear the truth. The truth? Her voice was ice. The truth is you're trying to extort money from hard-working families. You're holding an entire neighborhood hostage. No, I'm exercising my legal property rights. Rights you've been violating for 8 years. The room erupted. The room exploded with voices. People are shouting questions, demanding answers. Some were directed at me, most directed at Wanda. She held up a hand, but no one stopped talking. For the first time since I'd met her. She looked rattled. The perfect control was cracking. Sarah Chen stood up from her seat on the board. Everyone, please, let's hear what he has to say. The room gradually quieted. All eyes turned back to me. I pulled out my folder and held up the first document. This is the survey map from the county clerk. Old Callaway Trail Road sits entirely on my property. Not partially. Entirely. I let that sink in. When the developer built Pine Ridge 8 years ago, they had a temporary construction easement to use the road. It expired in 2018. There is no permanent easement recorded. None. Which means for the past 6 years, every single one of you has been driving across my land without legal permission. Someone in the front row spoke up. But we were told the road was public access when we bought our houses. Then you were told wrong. The developer should have secured a permanent easement before selling these homes. They didn't. I pulled out another document. This is my deed, recorded and certified. I own that road, and I have every legal right to control who uses it. Wanda's voice cut through the murmur. This is a shakedown. He's trying to force us to pay him thousands of dollars for access we've always had. Always had. I turned to face her. You mean illegally had. And you knew it. You're a real estate attorney. You reviewed these documents when you bought your house. You knew there was no recorded easement. You just hoped no one would ever call you on it. Her face went pale, then red. That's a lie. Is it? I held up another paper. This is the title insurance policy from when you purchased your home. It specifically excludes coverage for access issues related to Old Callaway Trail Road. Your title company knew there was a problem, which means you knew too. I'd found that document yesterday, buried in public records. The moment I saw it, I knew I had her. You knew this was coming eventually. You just gambled that whoever bought the Callaway land wouldn't figure it out, or wouldn't care. The room went completely silent. Every eye was on Wanda now. She opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. The board will handle this. We'll hire our own attorney to review the matter. In the meantime, you need to remove that gate immediately, or we'll seek an injunction. Seek whatever you want, but while you're at it, maybe tell everyone here how much HOA money you've already spent on legal fees. I looked at Sarah. How much has the HOA paid Wanda's law firm in the past 2 years? Sarah hesitated, then quietly said, $82,000. The room erupted again, residents shouting, demanding explanations. Wanda tried to speak, but her voice was drowned out. I could see it happening in real time, the authority she'd built, the control she'd maintained. It was all collapsing. People were turning to each other, angry, confused, realizing they'd been kept in the dark about something that affected all of them. The room stayed silent for a long moment. People were looking at each other, having conversations without words, years of frustration, of being silenced, of feeling powerless. It was all rising to the surface. Someone in the back muttered, "She knew. She knew the whole time." Others nodded. A man in the middle stood up. "I move to remove Wanda Reese as HOA president effective immediately." Another voice. "I second that." Wanda's face went white. "You can't do that. There are procedures." Sarah pulled out a copy of the HOA bylaws. "Actually, we can. Emergency vote with a third majority present. We have 38 of 45 homeowners here. That's enough." She looked around the room. "All in favor of removing Wanda Reese as president." Hands went up. I counted them. 32. More than enough. All opposed. 5 hands. including Wanda's. Sarah's voice was steady, but I could hear the relief in it. Motion passes. Wanda, you're no longer president. Please leave the board table. For a long moment, Wanda didn't move. She just stood there, staring at the room like she couldn't believe what had just happened. Then she grabbed her portfolio and walked toward the door. She paused when she reached my row and looked directly at me. This isn't over. Yes, it is. She left. The door slammed behind her. The room sat in stunned silence for a moment. Then Sarah cleared her throat. We need to elect an interim president and treasurer, and we need to talk to Mr. Maddox about resolving this access issue. She looked at me. Are you willing to negotiate? I nodded. I never wanted a fight. I just wanted to be left alone, and I wanted you all to know the truth about what was going on. An older man in the front row raised his hand. What do you want? For the easement. I want a fair agreement. Something that compensates me for use of my property, but doesn't bankrupt anyone. And I want it recorded properly, so we never have this problem again. I paused. And I want the fine withdrawn and a public apology for the accusations your former president made about me. Sarah nodded. I think we can work with that. We talked for another hour. By the end of it, we had the outline of a deal. $5,000 annually for the easement, split among all 45 homes, about $110 per household per year. They'd maintain the road. I'd have the same access to community facilities as any resident, and everything would be properly documented and recorded. We shook hands. I unlocked the gate on my way home. 3 days later, Wanda filed a lawsuit against me. Personal lawsuit, not HOA, just her, claiming intentional infliction of emotional distress and demanding $200,000. Marcus called me when he got the papers. She's trying to hurt you financially, even if she can't win. Drag this out. Make it expensive. So what do? We countersue, and we show the judge exactly who's been acting in bad faith here. Marcus didn't waste time. Within a week, he filed a counterclaim against Wanda for defamation, abuse of process, and breach of fiduciary duty. The defamation claim focused on her public statements at the HOA meeting, calling me dangerous and implying I was a threat to children. The abuse of process claim targeted the original $500 fine she'd issued without legal authority. And the breach of fiduciary duty claim hit the hardest. She'd used HOA funds to hire her own law firm, creating a clear conflict of interest that benefited her financially while costing the community thousands. The preliminary hearing was set for 3 weeks out. In the meantime, life in Pine Ridge was changing. The new HOA board, led by a retired carpenter named Tom Hendricks, had opened up all the financial records. They hired an independent auditor who found more problems. $50,000 in questionable legal expenses over 3 years. Most of it was paid to Wanda's firm for cases that never should have been filed. Residents who'd been threatened with liens for minor violations. Families who'd been intimidated into paying fines they didn't actually owe. The more people looked, the worse it got. Sarah Chen called me one evening. We're voting next week on whether to pursue our own lawsuit against Wanda for misuse of HOA funds. She paused. A lot of people here feel like they were lied to, manipulated. She ran this place like her personal kingdom. I told her I understood, and I did. Wanda hadn't just tried to bully me. She'd been doing it to an entire community for years. I'd just been the first person to push back hard enough to expose it. The day of the hearing arrived. The courthouse was old brick and marble floors, the kind of building that made you speak quietly even when no one was around. Marcus met me outside courtroom 3. Wanda's representing herself, pro se. That's either very confident or very desperate. We walked in and took our seats at the defendant's table. Wanda was already there at the plaintiff's table, dressed in a navy suit. Her expression was neutral, but I noticed her jaw was tight. The judge entered, and we all stood. Judge Patricia Morrison, mid-60s, gray hair pulled back, reading glasses perched on her nose. She sat down and reviewed the case files in front of her. Then she looked up at Wanda. Ms. Reese, you're proceeding pro se on this matter. Yes, Your Honor. Very well. Let's hear your opening statement." Wanda stood and launched into her case. She painted me as someone who'd bought property specifically to extort money from a community. Someone who'd blocked access to 45 families, preventing them from getting to their homes, causing emotional distress and financial harm. She cited case law about good faith negotiations and abuse of property rights. Her delivery was smooth, professional, exactly what you'd expect from someone who'd spent years in courtrooms. When she finished, the judge turned to Marcus. Marcus stood slowly. "Your Honor, this case falls apart under the slightest scrutiny. Mr. Maddox owns the property in question. That's not in dispute. Ms. Reese's clients, the HOA, were using that property without any recorded easement for 8 years. That's trespassing. When Mr. Maddox discovered this and attempted to negotiate, Ms. Reese responded by threatening legal action and refusing to even acknowledge the facts. He pulled out the documents. These are certified records from the county showing no valid easement exists. Ms. Reese, as a real estate attorney, would have known this. Instead of addressing it properly, she issued an illegal fine against Mr. Maddox, publicly defamed him, and then sued him when he exercised his legal property rights." The judge held up a hand. "Ms. Reese, do you have documentation showing a valid easement for Old Callaway Trail Road?" Wanda hesitated, just for a second, but it was enough. "Your Honor, we believe we have prescriptive easement rights through historical use. Prescriptive easement in North Carolina requires 20 years of continuous use. How long has Pine Ridge existed?" 8 years, Your Honor. But then you don't have a prescriptive easement." The judge looked at the documents Marcus had submitted, and there's no recorded easement here at all. She looked back at Wanda. "Ms. Reese, it appears Mr. Maddox is correct. The HOA has been using his property without legal authority. That means he had every right to restrict access." She closed the file. "I'm dismissing your claim. Furthermore, I'm allowing Mr. Maddox's counterclaim to proceed. You'll both receive notice for the next hearing date." Wanda's face went rigid. "Your Honor, I'd like to request. Request denied. We're done here." The judge stood and left. The courtroom was silent. Marcus gathered his papers and leaned over to me. "That went better than expected." I looked across at Wanda. She was standing perfectly still, staring at the empty judge's bench. Then she turned, grabbed her briefcase, and walked out without looking at me. 2 weeks later, I got a call from Marcus. "Wanda's asking to settle. She'll drop her lawsuit and pay $15,000 to cover your legal fees if you drop the counterclaim." I thought about it. The money would be nice, but this wasn't really about money. What happens to her law license if we push forward? If we win on the breach of fiduciary duty claim, the state bar will likely open an investigation. She could face sanctions, suspension, maybe worse. I made my decision. Tell her I'll settle on one condition. She writes a public apology, posts it herself, admits she was wrong about the fine, wrong about the easement, wrong about everything, and she agrees to never contact me or the HOA again. Marcus smiled. "I'll draw up the terms." 3 days later, Wanda signed. The apology appeared online 3 days later. Wanda posted it herself, exactly as the settlement required. It was short, formal, and carefully worded by lawyers, but the core message was clear. She acknowledged that I had legal ownership of Old Callaway Trail Road. She admitted the HOA fine had been issued without proper authority. She retracted her statements about me being a danger to the community, and she apologized for any harm caused. The post stayed up for exactly 24 hours before she deleted her account entirely. But by then, screenshots had circulated through the whole community. Everyone had seen it. The Pine Ridge HOA moved forward with their own action. They filed a formal complaint with the North Carolina State Bar, documenting the conflict of interest, the misuse of funds, and the pattern of intimidation Wanda had used during her tenure as president. The State Bar opened an investigation. 2 months later, they issued their findings: public reprimand, 1-year suspension of her law license, mandatory ethics training before reinstatement, It was all posted on the State Bar's public website. Permanent record. Anyone searching her name would find it. Her law firm let her go quietly. No announcement. Just an updated partner list on their website with her name removed. Sarah told me later that Wanda had put her house up for sale within a week of the suspension. By spring, she was gone. Moved 2 counties over. I never saw her again. The easement agreement was finalized in late November. Marcus and the new HOA board worked out every detail. $5,000 annually, paid quarterly. The HOA would handle all road maintenance, snow removal, and repairs. I got full access to the community pool, tennis courts, and clubhouse as a courtesy member. And most importantly, everything was recorded properly with the county. Legal, official, permanent. No more gray areas, no more assumptions. Just clear documentation that protected everyone. Life settled into a rhythm after that. Winter came, and the mountains turned white. I worked from my cabin, took calls from clients while looking out at snow-covered pines, and finally got the peace I'd been searching for. The HOA stopped being a source of stress and became what it should have been from the start. Just neighbors. Tom Hendricks invited me to a community barbecue in December. I almost said no, but then I figured I should at least try. I showed up with a case of beer and stayed for 3 hours. People were friendly, curious. A few thanked me for exposing what had been going on. Others apologized for not speaking up sooner. It felt like the whole neighborhood had exhaled after holding its breath for years. Sarah Chen and I became friends. She'd invite me over for dinner sometimes, her and her husband and their 2 kids. We'd talk about everything except Wanda and the lawsuit. It was nice, normal, the kind of neighborly relationship I'd hoped for when I first moved here. One evening in February, Tom stopped by my cabin with a bottle of whiskey. We sat on my porch in the cold, watching the sun set through the trees. "You did a good thing," he said, standing up to her. "A lot of us wanted to. We just didn't know how. You would have figured it out eventually. Maybe. But it might have taken years, and costs a lot more people a lot more stress." He poured 2 glasses. "To property rights, and knowing when to fight." We drank to that. The whiskey burned going down, but warmed everything after. Spring came, and the forest turned green again. I started hiking the trails on my property, exploring parts I hadn't seen yet. Found a small creek that ran through the back section. Started planning where I might build a workshop. Life moved forward. The lawsuit became a story I told sometimes when people asked how I ended up here. But it stopped being the thing that defined my relationship with this place. The HOA thrived under new leadership. Fees went down after they cut unnecessary legal expenses. Financial reports were posted monthly for anyone to review. Meetings became actual discussions instead of lectures. People started volunteering for committees, getting involved, caring about the community because it felt like theirs again. I watched it happen from a distance, glad I'd played a part, but happy not to be in the middle of it anymore. One morning in May, I was sitting on my porch with coffee, same spot where this whole thing started. A car came up Old Callaway Trail Road, slowed as it passed my cabin, and the driver waved. I waved back. Didn't even know who it was, just a neighbor heading to work, using the road we all now knew belonged to me, but that I'd chosen to share, because that's what you do when you're part of a community. You find the balance between standing up for yourself and making room for others. The envelope that started everything was still in a drawer inside. I'd kept it as a reminder, not of the fight, but of what happens when you know your rights and refuse to be pushed around. Sometimes the system works. Sometimes justice takes effort and patience and documentation. But it works. You just have to be willing to do the work. I finished my coffee and went inside to start my day. The mountains were quiet. The road was open. And life was exactly what I'd come here looking for. Peace. On my own terms. Sometimes standing up for yourself means knowing your rights and refusing to back down. If this story reminded you of why documentation and courage matter, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Have you ever dealt with an HOA or property dispute? Drop a comment below and share your experience. and if you believe in fighting back the right way, through facts and the law. Hit subscribe for more stories like this one. Justice doesn't happen by accident. It happens when people refuse to be pushed around. Thanks for reading, and I'll see you in the next one.